alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So before we start our dars today, I want to address for a few minutes an important matter because as some of you will have known, yesterday, I believe it was yesterday, or maybe it was announced yesterday, we had the first Muslim who passed away from coronavirus in the UK. And alayhi rahmatullah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept him into Jannah al-Firdaus and give his family patience, Allahumma ameen. And it was not far in North Manchester. And I was consulted today on a number of matters associated with that. And I wanted to reiterate that so that it goes on camera, so that it can be spread, so that I don't have to repeat myself. Obviously, for the last few weeks, I've been banging on about this idea that we can't be taking this virus. We have to take it seriously. There's one thing joking about it, but actually understanding that it's going to be a real problem for the health services. I think everybody now understands that, and that the danger to our elderly is real. And in actual fact, over the next few weeks, people are going to realize that many of us are going to lose our elderly loved ones before the time that we expected. Everybody has to go, but we have a general expectation based upon normal health, normal realities. But soon we're going to see over the next few weeks and then next few months, this number skyrocketing. And again, it's not just because, it's not so much that the coronavirus is the killer virus of all time, but it's circumstances that are not allowing us to control it due to being overwhelmed. And that's qaddarullah ma shafa'al. What I want to discuss very briefly is the issues of ghusl, of kafan, of dafan, and janaza. Now, of course, this is a very important reminder for us all to revive the fiqh of death, the fiqh of janaza, and we should be asking our masajid and our organizations. I'll be now putting a greater push on that in terms of the class that we had as well, so that everybody is aware of these rulings in principle and then in extraordinary circumstances, which we are currently in. So some of the health authorities have made their minds up. They've decided that the corpse, after a person has passed away, is still infective. Now, this is a difficult one because we know that this is not something like, super infective, such as those which are infecting people just based upon touch. I mean, touching the body itself, which is, of course, very, very infective. However, the medical experts, and that's what we take our advice based upon, are considering that the body is infective, and therefore they are not allowing normative funeral procedures to go ahead. Let alone the fact that the family can't be involved. Any person who passes away, by the way, their entire family is immediately quarantined. In fact, they've been quarantined a week before the person has passed away. So I want you to know that, just to appreciate and how important it is for the community to be able to support those that are going to be suffering, that they will not see their loved ones pass away. I want you to appreciate that. They will be in quarantine at home whilst their loved ones are dying. So this is real. Like I said, everybody, it's not going to do nothing to me. It's not flu. It's this, it's that. So if you've seen the previous videos I've recorded, then you'll know that this is no joke. So what are then the rulings concerning the ghusl? What are the matters? So the first one is that these are obligatory aspects. Individually, they are obligations. To wash the body is an obligation. To shroud is an obligation. And then to bury is an obligation, and then to have a prayer is a obligation as well. These are four individual separate aspects which are obligatory. However, within each of these individual four categories, there is some laxity with respect to what can be done. And that is now up for debate. So for example, the washing. We know that there's a sunnah way of washing, but actually, if it comes down to it, then literally just throwing water on a deceased body would suffice, quote unquote, the ghusl. The real question that needs to be asked is that, is the ghusl of the deceased, is it an act of worship or is it an act of cleansing? And in my opinion, it's not an act of cleansing. And hardly, and this is a debate that, people who study fiqh would be aware of, like wudu and ghusl from janaba. Are these acts of cleansing or are they acts of worship? And the answer is that they are acts of worship, even though we might not think that. These are ritual ablutions, ritual baths that we do for the sake of doing it, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so therefore, the idea that if it's not an act, or if it is an act of worship, then a Muslim should do it with an intention for the act of worship, because those are the requirements of an act of worship. If it is just for cleansing, and the reason why the taghsil al-mayyit, to wash the dead body, is one which is debatable, is because there very much is a cleansing process involved, both from the internal, in terms of evacuation of the orifices, as well as the external, and the perfuming, and the use of sidr, and the soap at a proper level. So it's a mixture between two. There are many weak hadith that would also indicate that it's an act of worship. So for example, we have hadith that says that those who are menstruating are not allowed to wash the dead body, hadith which is weak in my opinion. There are hadith that say that one must make wudu after you do the ghusl for the deceased, hadith weak in my opinion. Hadith that mention that you must make a ghusl after you wash the deceased body, hadith weak in my opinion. However, a number of the companions led that opinion. And therefore, there is a body of evidence that would suggest that if these kind of categories of people or these actions need to occur around the ghusl, it's not just an act of cleansing, but it does indicate that there could be an act of worship involved in there as well. Why is this important to answer? Because the health authorities do not want the Muslim imams to come and wash. They are, when I say don't want to, I don't mean anything nefarious there. I mean that they are saying that the body is infective. If you come in, then you're going to have to be quarantined, and so on and so forth. And we'll do it for you. If it's just wiping the body down, then we'll do it. If it's wipes, we'll do it. If it's disinfectant spray, we'll do it. If it's a shroud, then we'll do it. So that's what needs to be answered. And so in my opinion, at this moment in time right now, where the numbers of the dead are in, single digits or double digits, and it's manageable, then it is a requirement for the Muslims to go and do this ghusl themselves. And if that means wearing a hazmat suit or wearing at least an N95 medical grade mask and protective at least headgear, then we're not so worried about the hands and everything. That can all be cleansed. It's about inhalation, which is the major fitna. So whilst it can be managed, and whilst there are enough people in the community who are knowledgeable enough to go and make their ghusl, then that should happen. However, if it reaches a level where there are not enough people, or there is a condition that is placed by the local health authority that says that you have to then go into quarantine for 14 days if you make this ghusl, then this is what I consider to be a mashaqqa, which is a difficulty which is not required to bear in the Sharia, and therefore I do not believe that one has to then make the ghusl. I repeat, I believe the obligation of the ghusl is forgiven, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So up until it's manageable, we should try to wash, as long as they don't put the condition upon us that we have to go into quarantine as a result. Because this is not something which, unless of course you have, you test positive, then of course you need to go for coronavirus, but for isolation. However, if you're completely fine and everybody is just being quarantined for no reason, or this is the person who's washing the bodies, how they're going to go and wash the next one if they're in quarantine, this is not manageable. And so in this point, we say, سقطت يعني الفريضة, يعني the obligation has been lifted, and the ghusl does not need to be done. They will then have the body in its cleansed way, placed into a bag that will be sealed in a very specific manner. Is it permissible to have this body in this bag in basic principle? Of course not. We have a kafan. We will request them that they put a shroud on the body, and we should give them the shroud. And once they have the shroud, then they can put it in the plastic bag. It's not a problem for us that remains. Let's say they said we cannot open the bag after it's been sealed, and we cannot shroud the body. Then in this situation, if that occurs, then it is permissible to continue without having to force them to open the bag. The aim should be to get in there before, educate them before that if this is going to go wrong, please shroud this body before you put them in the plastic bag. They will then want to seal that body in a coffin of some sort. In principle, the Muslims are not buried in coffins, but due to the need, this is something which is again acceptable. And so if it is sealed and therefore no one can see that body and so on, then you can proceed on that point as well. The final point is the issue of the janazah. The janazah prayer is not something which needs to be there at that moment, with the body at that moment. It is the haqq of the deceased to be buried immediately. It is the right of the deceased to be placed into the grave immediately without delay or unnecessary delay. And so therefore, the presence, it is sometimes possible in some of the graveyards up and down the country and other areas of the Western world that will be watching this video in their kind of Muslim sections of their graveyard, that they have areas where they can pray. The body in principle is in front when you pray the janazah. But if it's not allowed because it's in quarantine, because of the nature of it being infective, then the prayer would go ahead regardless without the body. The Muslims in the masjid should do that, and then the family themselves can later then pray on their own at the grave, as was done by the Prophet ﷺ when the woman who used to clean the masjid passed away, and a long time later, the Prophet ﷺ prayed again individually. It's one of the exceptions for praying in a graveyard, otherwise it's not allowed. But the janazah prayer, standing without ruku, without sujood, and the nature that it is something which is permissible. So, those are the main matters which come to mind. As I said, right now, it is manageable. We're available to make the ghusl. We're available to guide them towards the burial. Naturally, there won't be the digging of a lahad, or there won't be the turning of the body towards the qibla, etc., etc. But these are not requirements. These are not obligatory requirements. These are sunnah acts that we prefer. So the body should be buried, and the body can be buried before the janazah is prayed. But there is no reason that the janazah should be delayed. In a masjid, as soon as a person passes away, then that janazah should be then prayed, and then the body then be buried according to the local health authority rules at that time in order to protect the rest of the masses. So in my mind, that's a summary of the matters that I dealt with today, and I think that will matter to the people moving forward over the next few weeks. This will increase hugely. I want you to be aware that it is clearly targeting those who are infirm, those who have preconditions, and as you know, this virus hasn't even had a chance to mutate yet. We're actually all being taken down by its original form. And it will become a norm. It will become that seasonal fifth kind of respiratory virus, like the cold virus and the flu virus. And eventually we'll get it under control. But the problem is that it's taking too many people at the same time. And the hospitals do not have the ability to cope with the amount of respiratory care that's required for each individual case. So general advice, I'm not going to repeat that to you, with respect to, isolation and being careful and being clean and not having to necessarily shake hands, and that's quite fine. The use of, by the way, there's a lot of focus on alcohol, sanitizers, blah, blah. Alcohol is a pure substance. It's allowed to use on your hands, but people forget that this is not a bacteria. Bacteria have a real problem against alcohol. Viruses, not much so. They will. It is effective, but nothing close to soap and nothing close to the mechanical, physical action, which is why there's a lot of basic actions that can prevent this. So, for example, physically, as I said, suppressing your cough entirely is very successful. Physically, really rubbing your hands hard is very successful. Making sure that your throat, for example, is wet all the time. There is an idea, people think it's an old wives' tale, but the idea that people get more ill when the AC is on is not something which is just anecdotal. It's clear that the membranes are dried out further, and it allows for basic conditions for viruses in some way that we don't understand to get a greater chance of infecting that person, which is why so many of us get a cold or a sore throat when we are in those environments. So drinking lots of water and staying fit and healthy, eating well, is making sure that your immune system is good. And that goes triple for our elderly at this moment in time. We need to protect the elderly most. Are there any specific questions that are linked to the issue of the deceased in their state? Yes.
Discussion now. Closing the masjid. When should it be taken?
Yeah. So the question is that in the next few weeks we are expecting a government at least pressure and possibly an obligation to close places like masajid because of the gathering of people. Now, the fact is that actually the right thing to do for small gatherings? Allah knows best. If people are responsible, then there should be no reason for that. However, people aren't responsible either. We know that every single day people are coughing all over the place. They don't get it. They don't want to accept it. So it's an acceptable ruling, and it's an acceptable Islamic practice as well for the masjids to be closed. And that is a sense of emergency, such as the condition now in China and in Iran and in Italy. Then that is an acceptable ruling for masajid to be closed. And that doesn't affect anything legally other than the Jum'ah prayer, because it's not obligatory to attend the regular prayers anyway, but the Jum'ah prayer is important. And in this case, the people will pray Dhuhr on a continuous basis until the masajid or public gatherings are allowed. And I want to say that if there is a Muslim community that can't go into a masjid, but the weather is good enough for them to have a gathering outside, for the local community, then that's something which is good to reinstate if that is permissible. Yes.
With regards to coming to the masjid whilst having a non-contagious disease, there are some persons of ulama say that's more rewarded that if you attempt to come to the masjid, if you have a non-contagious disease. They say back before when he became elderly and he performed 3 times and he tried to come to the masjid, or he did come to the masjid, even though he had.
Yeah, there's absolutely no doubt about that, because everybody has aches and pains and ill and tired and whatnot. If people do not have contagious diseases, of course you're required to come to the masjid.
Even though coming to the masjid might make you worse.
Absolutely. Because what is illness? Illness is a trial from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet ﷺ described that in a number of hadith. and the people who are patient with it, who maintain their worship during it, then they are increased in reward. And those who decrease in those actions, if they had high level of ibadah before they became ill, they get the same amount of reward during their illness. That's the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. If a person then finds it's too much, they don't have to come. This is all because you're not a danger to anyone else. But if you are becoming a burden to other people or a danger, then of course it's not permissible to attend a masjid. But for non-contagious conditions and diseases, this is a time actually where Muslims, from their own experience, will know that they find it better to worship Allah, easier to worship Allah. They feel more closer to Allah because you feel dependent, you feel more weak, you feel desperate. People who have fever and whatever in sajda, you really feel the pain. You really feel that weakness and that dependency upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's a great time to increase ibadah and dua, but not when it gets to the danger of other people in terms of contagion or anything like that. Any other issues? Yes?
You got anything to add on this panic vultures purchasing everything like that?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously it's a joke, that people are only starting to take it seriously once the toilet rolls have run out and once their football matches are called off. Now suddenly people are seeing it as a crisis, okay? But there is a serious point in panic buying as well. It is not permissible to buy to a level that hurts the rest of the community. This is actually not permissible. So there is a fine line. I mean, there are some people who, like myself, just to take an example, I am a bulk buyer anyway. I don't go to the supermarket every week. I like to go once every 2 months, every 3 months, and I buy certain items I eat a lot or use a lot, and I buy 5, 10 at a time. So that's something which is normal bulk buying. Anything above that, which is now causing panic, which is leading to shortages, which is leading to fighting, this is not permissible. This is not permissible. And especially when it's clear that the item itself is not actually an essential, but rather some of the just whims of the of people's desires or whatever.